So welcome back, everybody. And now it's time for our first round table discussion of the final plenary sessions. The theme of this debate is agroforestry and the Sustainable Development Goals. We know how important that theme is. And it's my pleasure now to introduce our chair for this session, Jean Vidal. He was here as well on day one, but he is an international senior journalist who specialises in environmental journalism. And he has been the Guardian's and was the Guardian's environmental editor of the British Guardian newspaper for 20 years or so. He's been an environmental journalist for many years. He's reported from more than 100 countries, and many of the stories he's reported on have been environmental ones. I'm a big fan of John Vidal's journalism. He's just been such a significant journalist in highlighting environmental issues. So I'm going to hand over to John in just a moment, and then he is going to introduce his panellists for the session. Because we had busy sessions on day one, I know many of you were frustrated that we didn't get a chance to reach out to you to take your questions. We're going to try very hard to ensure we get to do that this time round. So John, I'm going to hand over to you, and then you and I will be chatting during the session.
You're very kind saying senior. I would put it veteran. But now, could the panel please come up, and then we can introduce you. So there's Vincent, Gwendoline, Rakesh, Dennis, and Gilles. Are we all here? There we come. Fantastic. Good to see you. Okay, so we're building up to a climax. We can see the end, but we've learnt an enormous amount. I have to say, I'm staggered by how much I didn't know before, and I now think I know. Those posters are just extraordinary, the stories they tell from all the way around the world. Some are rather depressing from Iran and others, but there's some really, really stimulating stuff. So it's been a fantastic, on a personal note, fantastic thing for me. One of the great benefits of a meeting like this is that you meet people you would never normally meet, and it really is an extraordinary sort of cross section of society here. But this afternoon I think we're going to make the world even bigger, because we have got 4 or 5 people who really do know the stuff from totally different perspectives, and we're going to be doing it slightly differently. We're going to have an introductory talk by one person, but then we're going to have more of a conversation. So it'll be a conversation between us and also with you. So we would really like you to pile in with questions. Don't make them easy, make them difficult, put them on the spot, and we'll see how it goes. So, okay, I'll just introduce you very briefly to who we have here. First is Vincent Guitz. Vincent, I'm so sorry. Vincent. He's going to give us the global picture. He is the Director of Research at the Center for International Forestry Research, and specializing in agroforestry. He's basically Mr. Agroforestry. So we're honored and excited to have him. He's been working with the French government, with other governments, with the UN. There's really, his breadth is just staggering. We have Gwendoline Yu, who tells me she's from Canada, but I think she can speak in French as well. She'll give us the banker's perspective. She works for BNP Paribas, which is the 8th biggest bank in the world, and I think the biggest in France. One of the only ones I don't owe money to, I think. And she's head of engagement and transformation, which is a title which is pretty hard to live up to, frankly, but good luck to you anyway. Now we have Rakesh, who I've got to know a little bit over the last day or two. Rakesh is an extraordinary multicultural thinker, writer, politician from India. He has set up one of India's most important think tanks. He writes from anything from the moral, the fate of the Indian elephant or to moral decline. or post-truth, anything you want to know. Anyway, he's turned his attention to the Indian agroforestry scene because this is actually one of the most exciting things in the world. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then we have Dennis Garrity, who's the former Director General, probably known to a lot of you, of the World Agroforestry Centre, now a drylands ambassador for the UN Convention on desertification. Then Dennis is seeking not a green agriculture, but an evergreen agriculture. And I'm told he also likes motorbikes a lot, but how they fit, I'm not quite sure. And finally, we have Gilles Delaunay. And thank goodness he's here, because Gilles is a real farmer. He's going to tell you about himself, but all I know is he's from Normandy, and he is a brilliant agroforester, and he's got a very interesting story to tell. So first we're going to have Vincent, who's going to give us a longer talk, and then we'll have our conversation. So Vincent, please take the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and good afternoon, everyone. So let me just start by briefly introducing FTA, which is the CGIAR research program on forest, trees, and agroforestry, which is a broad research partnership that is led by C4 with ICRAF, Biodiversity, CIRAD, Cartier, Tropenbos, and INRA, and really grateful most of them are currently here in this Congress. And what we try to do in FTA as researchers is to try to fully leverage the role of forest, trees, and landscapes for exploiting synergies and managing trade-offs between environment and development. So the topic of this session is very timely, we believe, because there is an increasing awareness of the role of the land use sectors for the achievement of the SDGs and of the Paris Agreement, and we are precisely now almost in 2020, where in the CBD, in the UNFCCC, with the implementation of the Paris Agreement and with the NDCs, and then also with the SDGs, and much of these commitments integrate forest, trees, and agroforestry as well as their implementation. And very often there is mention of that, but there is not much known about how to do it. What does it take? What tree species? What technique? What business models? What policies to make this happen? And I think this Congress is quite timely in the way that now we need to frame policies. Now we need to implement them, supported by society and supported by science. So here today I will start by considering the relations between agriculture in the sense of crops and livestock and trees and forests in the context of the implementation of the SDGs. And then we will show that agroforestry is in fact more than trees in the field. The Congress invites to a broader reflection on and based on agroforestry between forest and agriculture in landscapes. And then yes, what does it take? Implementation is not that simple. We've all experienced that the question is what can we do on the ground, and we're very pleased to have a farmer also in this panel to tell us the perspectives. So, interactions between forest and agriculture, let alone with the issue of deforestation, is often seen as a critical point of sustainable development. And to achieve the SDGs requires a close look at the synergies and the trade-offs, particularly as regards to natural resources and especially land use. We will not reach the SDGs, we believe, if we don't manage to leverage synergies and manage trade-offs between trees and agriculture inside the landscapes and for multiple benefits. And I would just like here to highlight 3 ways to do so, from trade-offs to synergies, as we've also seen during the conference. The first one has been described largely in the reports of UFRO and also of the high-level panel of experts, is to fully recognize that there is no antagonism between trees and forests and food security. At the contrary, there is contributions of trees and forests, and largely through agroforestry, to all the dimensions of food security: availability of food, access to food, utilization of food, and also the stability, the resilience dimension, which is hugely important when we consider the role of agroforestry. A second way is to reverse the approach, we believe, between trees and climate change, from a focus on mitigation, which is very important, a key role, but increasingly to a focus on adaptation. What can forest and trees and agroforestry bring to the adaptation of other sectors, of course, of agriculture first, but also other sectors beyond agriculture. So this is also a shift between a global carbon entry point to something that is more a local entry point, a place-based entry point, if you will. Then third pathways towards synergies is how to optimize land use. And this can take multiple forms. We need to limit land needs. We've seen that that can be done by improving yields, improving the so-called land equivalent ratios, compounding from different productions. We can also facilitate multiple uses of land for production, but also for other ecosystem services, providing therefore multiple benefits from the same areas. There is also an interest in keeping some undisturbed areas in or around the fields to maximize the ecosystem services for agriculture. And then, yes, limiting land use change impact through land zoning, landscape approaches, preserving areas for biodiversity conservation, sustainable management, ensuring biodiversity corridors, for example. So just 3 examples around food, around climate change, and around land use on reversing the perspectives from trade-offs to synergies. Now, why we believe that agroforestry is just more than trees in the field, and we could start here with looking at the historic definition of agroforestry back in 1982, which is a very comprehensive definition, and I would like to highlight 2 points of that definition. It is both the question of the interaction within a system, in a farm, and of the relation between the multiple benefit that these interactions provide in the productive element, as productive sphere, but also in the social and environmental dimension. And finally, this looks like very much as the SDG before the time. The second point is the issue of land management unit. And here, as we've shown also in this Congress, it's not necessarily bound to a unique scale or the farm scale. It could apply to the field, but it could also apply beyond the field, like we've seen with the example of windbreaks, for example, or to any landscape management. And in fact, if I would say the planet was considered as a land management unit, it could even inspire the way we manage it. So I think it's a great definition. I'm not saying it because it was framed in ICRAF, but because I think it was quite a visionary of the SDGs, and maybe it could inspire land management beyond the field. And I take this opportunity to recall here that a request was formulated last February at the last meeting of the Commission on Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture in FAO, and in February, and that 2 countries have called for an agreed definition of agroforestry, which is currently lacking in the US, and that could be a way forward. Now, integrating agriculture and forestry needs to happen at several scales, from what we do with genes, what we do with varieties, strategic resources, up to the planet. And we need to consider all of these scales. And just to take examples, when we often think about agroforestry in the fields, for example, the increase of plantation systems, rubber system, cocoa systems, etc. There are also lots of opportunity there. Managing each of these scales involves several nested governance levels, and each leveraging multi-stakeholder perspectives. And this can also call for promoting a broader understanding of agroforestry across the whole range of forest and agricultural system, and across forest and landscape transition in a proactive way to restore ecosystem functions. So since agroforestry, agriculture and agricultural research has now to address a more complex set of objectives just beyond production, agroforestry research has also a lot to show about agroecology. On substance, and we've seen that in this Congress again, because of the various interaction between plants and crops, the effects on ecosystem services, and the effects on livelihoods, and often with a longer time perspective, medium, long-term scales. And then questions on how we need to do research in an inclusive way, participatory way, with pluridisciplinary method. And to a certain extent, agroforestry research can help transform agronomy and farming towards more medium and long-term thinking than just annual, then towards the conservation of non-disturbed areas towards the promotion of natural ecological processes and towards the management of diversity. But such a radical transformation would require considerable changes that needs to be supported by research and evidence. And I'll just briefly describe some of these fields where we believe research is particularly needed. First, we need to recognize, understand, and address the drivers of simplification of farming and forestry system. There are influence of downstream actors. There is a difficulty to organize and collect diversified product. There is difficulty to organize the provision of diversified inputs and services. The difficulty for farmers, we also believe, that to manage time and resources, including farm labor, to master technology for diverse production. And the difficulty also to organize knowledge and technology and sharing it in a way that empowers farmers to design their own system, not in a top-down way. It's far easy for everybody to apply the same model with the same set of inputs and techniques. Agroforestry is much more than that. It is more about options by context. Many, if not most, of the drivers of simplification are economic or justified by cost and benefit consideration. And this is where research has to go deeper than into the economics of agroforestry, provide good case studies showing economic returns over time, better showing the resilience benefit from an economic perspective, including, for instance, buffering price volatility. To change the way economics of agricultural production are looked at, not on a yearly basis, but with longer time scales, and also the ones for risk management and for investment. Particularly important is also the development of inclusive and effective value chains. And all these elements that I've just mentioned, we believe in FTA, and I guess you'll hear in the second panel also by Fergus Sinclair, can help identify or design a set of options. This is the role of research, providing options, not prescriptions, suited to different contexts that we are also able to characterize and identify that would work not only agronomically, but also environmentally, economically, and socially. The development of these solutions on the ground then requires an enabling environment, rights and institutions. There is the whole aspects of land tenure, tree tenure, use rights. There are landscape governance mechanisms so that the benefits that are manifesting themselves at that level can be supported by change at lower levels. And mechanisms, we believe, such as innovation platform to support smallholders and farmers groups to participate in research, to have access to high-quality tree genetic material and associated technologies, access to techniques, materials, and training for tree growing, and for the first transformation, wood or non-wood products. And then we believe we need inclusive business models that facilitate access to finance and credit and access to market. Finally, because agroforestry contributes to the SDG, it has to be included in the measurement of progress. And measuring agroforestry, let alone starting with the hectares in agroforestry, can be a proxy, an easy indicator for the progress of agriculture's contribution to the SDG, and in particular, SDG 2, there is an indicator there, the percentage of agricultural area under productive and sustainable agriculture. We believe that hectares in agroforestry should count towards that indicator. But to measure the agroforestry contribution to the SDG, we need two things. We need to understand the contribution to each individual SDG, meaning having a clear theory of change, showing at national level how much agroforestry contributes to each of the individual objectives and the indicators. And then we need a good mean to measure agroforestry itself, good agroforestry data, good agroforestry statistics, and insertion of agroforestry in agricultural survey more systematically. And in fact, in case where agroforestry seems to be neglected, it is often a symptom that the relation between agriculture and forestry are not properly thought at national level. So what do we need in terms of the way forward? From our perspective, from the FTA research program, we think we need a research agenda. Lots has been collaboratively elaborated. There's a lot of knowledge. We need to understand what are the priorities in terms of the way forward, and this Congress is the right place to discuss this. We also need a policy agenda that is evidence-based, and this is also one of the reasons why I was mentioning the definition. Unless a government, unless policymakers or unless stakeholders have an agreed definition on what is they are talking about and what is agroforestry, it's very difficult to build incentive mechanisms on top of this to promote its adoption. And then we need an improved tripartite dialogue between science, society, and policies, and putting the farmers at the centers. And I think we have also an opportunity this year, because the Committee on World Food Security of the United Nations will discuss for the first time the issue of agroecology. And this brings the opportunity to insert fully agroforestry into agriculture, between agriculture and forest, through the development of agroecology. I think I'll stop there for the discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And actually, before you sort of sit down and relax too much, there's one or two little questions. You're talking about we need major changes in agriculture to reach a sort of sustainable level. I mean, are we talking about 50% change? Are we talking about 100% change? Do we need a whole new rethink? Are we on the right track? What's going on? Can you see progress being made in these areas? And just of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, at least 5 by my count, maybe even 6, have to do with agroforestry, or could have something. Are we actually getting there? Or is there any chance of us reaching it?
I think we're seeing progress in many areas, but we're also seeing trends that we would need to counteract. These trends have been mentioned in this Congress: the trends towards simplification, the trends towards scale. We want to scale up, but there is a natural trend growing in terms of the development of plantations, rubber, palm oil, cocoa, coffee. These are systems where millions of hectares will be developed just because of market demand in the future. So how can we make sure that these value chains can also be a home for agroforestry, and that will only be done, I think, if we question how can it work for the farmers, how can it work for the smallholders operating in these scales, or mainly. That's one of the key constraints we have now to face. Multiple benefit at the level of the landscape and the planet, that we know, but how can a farmer really decide to make it work and to opt for these systems, or reverse back to them in case they were.
You also talked about you need a research agenda. Are you talking about a global research agenda, or one for the UN? Or we've seen the huge research that's being done by much of people here. What more research do we actually need?
No, yes, fully. I think it needs to be a global research agenda. This is one of the fantastic things in this Congress, that we can see and we can compare in all the continents what is being done, often in the same value chain: cocoa in Latin America, cocoa in Africa, in Indonesia, etc. Now, research has to provide a broader set of solutions to farmers, and therefore we need to open the set of options we can propose, and open our understanding of multiple contexts in a comparative way.
No, very good. Okay, so now let's turn it around. Rakesh, okay, India is the only country in the world, to my knowledge, it's probably changed even now, the only country which has actually grasped the agroforestry agenda, and 5 years ago, 2014, it put it into policy, into practice. And so we've had 5 years of huge experiment, potentially an enormous change. Did we actually see that change? What has happened in those 5 years? And how complicated was it to put it through?
First of all, the policy formulation itself was a very difficult proposition, because as you have heard, and today also, the agriculture, forest department diametrically opposite to each other. So let me tell you that in 2009, South Asia Director of ICRAF, Dr. V.P. Singh, who is here in the audience, she started advocacy for having a stand-alone policy for agroforestry, so that the agriculture and your forestry, they come on the same table. He started advocating. Initially, there are hiccups, there are resistances, but as he kept on advocating, he found a very able partner in our topmost policy level domain, that is National Agro Advisory Council under the previous government. And then there are 7 roundtable conferences, and with different stakeholders. 7 full-fledged consultation, 2 roundtable conferences were held. And after that, in 2013, NAC was convinced that we need to have a policy. And from there, it took off, and before the last Agroforestry Congress, to give it an impact, the Government of India came out with a full-fledged policy. Now, the second part of it, that what has happened in the last 5 years after the policy, that's much more important. The first issue that was raised in your presentation for SDG was land tenure. Land tenure, in fact, in India, the Government of India has been very sensitive about land tenure of the poorest of poor people. And in fact, before this policy itself, in 2006, Government of India enacted Forest Rights Act. Until last year, 1.7 million households of indigenous people, over 41 million acre land, were given land rights, which is inalienable but non-transferable. That is one. Then the present government also came out for sharecroppers, that Model Land Leasing Act, where all the rights of a farmer can be assigned to the sharecroppers also. So these are the 2 things that has happened in land tenure. Then, as mentioned, agroforestry doesn't find place whether in agriculture or in your forestry. So after this policy, Government of India took a view that this is a land use system, agriculture system. So the Department of Agriculture and Cooperation, Government of India, was made the nodal agency for taking it forward. That's the second thing. The third thing that happened, very important, that it became part of national agenda in terms of the fact that agroforestry has been identified as one of the 21 most important interventions for doubling of farmers' income across the country by 2022. These are the 3 drivers. And then after that, the relaxation in rules, the transit and felling regulation, which was in the domain of Forest Department, and they are being done by your state governments. So Government of India played a very good trick. They passed a program, sanctioned a program of $150 million, and then said money will go to only those states who relax their transit regulations. So till now, 26 states out of 28 have relaxed their regulations for transit regulation.
But would you say, if you're looking back, it has been a great success, or a failure? Where on the scale of...
Look, in the last 5 years, if you see the rate of success, more than 508 million plants have been planted. That becomes more than 1.2 million hectares. And in the last 50 years...
Sorry, 508 million trees?
Trees, yeah.
Really? 508 million trees?
Planted across the country. And that comes to your 1.2 million hectare. Yeah. If you convert this...
Yeah. How many are being cut down?
So, how many?
No. I was joking. No, but no, 500 million trees. That's obviously enormous. But has the farmer benefited? That's the key.
Yeah, farmers have benefited from one fact. I'll give you just one case.
Just Mike, if you
one example. There were a ban by Supreme Court from setting of the wood waste industry. Due to mutual discussion with the Ministry of Environment, they have relaxed their norms for setting up industry, wood-based industry. The first thing, wood and pulp industry has been taken out from the definition of wood-based industries. So they do not have to take any license from your government forest department. The second thing that happened, that more than 3,400 licenses have been issued for setting up of new wood-based industry in the country in the last 1 year. Impact, the cost of wood, which has come down to $67 per ton, has gone up to $107 per ton. This is the impact.
So overall, it really has changed the nature of the game. It's completely well done. Yeah,
definitely.
Okay, we're going to come back to that. Just how much did the government of India have to? I mean, how much has it given in grants or incentives or whatever in this period?
In fact, after this, many state governments have also come out with their own programs, in addition to central government.
Yeah.
And all of them, Government of India has committed $330 million. That is 60%. Only 40% have to come from states. So that is the amount.
So it's $330 million, and that's for 1.2 billion people. Wow. Okay, let's come on to the finance then. Okay, so I was reading the other day that the UN estimates that to reach the Sustainable Development Goal, the targets, is going to cost about $5 trillion. So it's cost India 330. Are the banks up for it? Is there any chance that the banks will make this money available? And what's stopping you, as the 8th biggest bank in the world, giving more money to people here or wherever? Why has agroforestry not taken off? Is it because of you, the banker?
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
So there is a 5 trillion cost, but along with this research paper that you're talking about, there's also $12 trillion of opportunity out there. So if you take the math and you do it, well, basically, if I step back and I say, okay, what's a bank's role? We're an intermediary. So we're there to bring money from our investors, institutional investors, all the way to corporates, and providing those services as well to retail people, so individuals like you and me. And in terms of what we're doing, we're not going to be able to do this by ourselves as an individual bank. So what we've been doing recently is working in conjunction with other stakeholders, because that's the only way that we'll be able to get to scale. And I think the best example in this is probably an agreement that we signed with UN Environment about 1.5 years ago. And Tony Simons talked about this, I think, not yesterday, the day before yesterday, was it, when he spoke? And this agreement that we set out to do was to bring $10 billion in capital markets financing into sustainable development projects in emerging countries. And the first example of that, and I won't get into it because Tony already talked about it, is the Tropical Landscape Financing Facility in Indonesia, where it's a bond. A portion of it is being sold off to a pension fund, which has money to spend within the tenor that's necessary. So this is one of the things that you talked about in terms of the length of time and the risk that's involved. And then there's also a part of it that's ensuring the supply chain for Mishna, one of our corporate clients, so that they have sustainable rubber going forwards. Within this specific project as well, there's a project going on in the province of Andhra Pradesh, where we are working with the state, initially using government subsidies that would typically go into fertilizers to promote zero-budget natural farming, and to try to get money in that way and see how we can package that and be able to sell that to investors. There's a lot of different things that I can unpack there, and all the way going down to smallholder farmers or the different supply chain, but I'd like to...
Just very briefly, are you saying that the money is there? If the projects are right, if the science is right, if the policy is right, you can find the money?
Exactly. The money is out there, and I think what's so important in working with the scientific and research community is that you hold the data. And in order for us to be able to be transparent to our institutional investors, the data has to be solid. So if I take another example, because that's how I think and then that's how it kind of makes sense, we have a client that's a coffee grower in Latin America, and we give them a loan. And as part of this loan, there's the interest rate that you got to pay, and we're calling it a sustainability-linked loan. So the loan terms itself is linked to no deforestation pacts that they have made. And how we're ensuring that that happens is we've then partnered with an NGO on satellite imagery and whatnot to make sure that as they go along through time, that does happen. And if they reach the goals that they've set out to do, then they get a discount off of that interest rate that they pay.
Okay, is it easier for the small farmer or for the big farmer? Are you making it? Is it easier for you to give $100 million as a loan or $2 million? I mean, could you help Gilles here with his hedgerows in Normandy?
I think the answer is it depends on who the actual buyer of that financial product would be. So yes and no. in a sense, initially, if I look to the past, I think it's been easier to give out big money to big projects. But we see now that, in fact, in order to make an impact and in order to accompany our clients and the rest of us through our transition, we need to get to the small farmers, either ensuring the various different cash flows that you're talking about, and looking at how, I work with a lot of financial engineers, they're geniuses, so they can model a lot of different things. And one of the things that we're talking about in terms of small loans is how do we aggregate all this together, package it, and then sell it then out to the institutional investors who will not necessarily be looking at that $100,000 or $1 million loan, but they will be looking at the scale of 100 million, and that's how we'll get scale.
No, very, very, very interesting. Gilles, let's come on to the.
Sorry, John. Just if you don't mind, just right now, because I think some very interesting points have been raised already. Before we move on to our other two, to Gilles and to Dennis, does anybody want to jump in here at this stage? We have roving microphones around. Does anybody want, to make a comment on what Vincent has been saying, or indeed our other two contributors? We've roving mics. I know a lot of you on day one wanted to talk. Gentleman at the very back. So hosts, can you see, keep your hand up please so that the host can get to you. Can you see where our gentleman is? Great. Just bear with us because we've got quite a full room. Because it might just be interesting to get some reaction now.
No, very much.
Hello. Good evening. It's a very wonderful presentation and very wonderful discussion which is eye-opening. Here, I want to suggest to evaluate the theme regarding this sustainability. The role played by the farmers. Farmers are the world feeder. And now farmers has to promote the agroforestry as well to meet the sustainability development goals. And our expectations are high from the farmers being as a major stakeholder. The farmers total depend on farmland's produce. It means for livelihood and socio-economic aspect. And we are addressing agroforestry at ecological and socio-economic level and subsistence level also, particularly for livelihood. But in my opinion, R&D component should include the production system which should address, focus on supply chain. Without supply chain, standing in the supply chain, we cannot achieve the sustainability goal through the agroforest systems. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe we'll take one or two more comments and then maybe get the panel to react to them. So does anybody else have a comment to make? Yes, gentlemen over here. And for those whose hands I'm missing, just keep them up. We'll take this gentleman and that lady there. Okay, so gentleman on the far corner there, and then that lady. We'll take your comments one after the other and then we'll throw them back to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to ask a question about the financing and the banks. The question is, first, if you look at financial products that can be sold in Africa, for instance, where the inflation rate is very high, so the brokers between the big financial institution and the farmers or the value chain are the local bankers, which account and get benefits in the local currency. They will still not going to benefit very much because their clients they are doing business in the local currency. So, and they have to pay in euros to international financing institution. This is an issue. And the other one is in India we discussed the issue of piecemeal approach in financing research, and this is not yet addressed. How are we going to embark into a project while the data in science couldn't be more accurate because of lack of funding and research?
Okay, really good points. Thank you so much for that. And then lady here, we'll take your point. Thank you.
So my question is also about finance. My father is a researcher in economics and mathematics. And he looked a lot at fracking, the fracking industry, and the fracking is actually losing money, yet its investors are still investing in fracking. So this is because of politics and how when a company goes bankrupt, the debts are erased and the CEO gets a raise, and investors still invest because the company has no debt. And my question is, for investors to invest in sustainable projects, do we really need solid research or better marketing?
Okay, great question. So, John, I'll hand it back to you to field those questions.
Well, gosh, or do we need sort of new morality as well? It's no, okay. So the central point was I think on the financing. I mean, you the banks. I mean, you're saying that you're only an intermediary and you're the market and but actually you have got a very big role to play in this. You can choose. You can choose whether to finance, Gilles or the fracking industry or whatever. On what basis is it only a financial decision you're making?
Not anymore. So there's still some banks that just make it on a pure financial decision, but within BNP Paribas, we have specific sector policies where we say we do not invest anymore in new projects in specific kinds of sectors, so including tobacco, no new Arctic drilling, etc. So there's about 8 or 9 different sector policies that we have out there. In our asset management arm of things, they're also looking at their portfolio to integrate ESG, to make sure that they get out of specific types of investments that we don't deem to be good or aligned with the 2-degree scenario. And so they're working with the 2-degree investment initiative to make sure that their portfolios align to that process. And then there was a question as well in terms of the fracking industry. So I think in terms of specific banks, obviously I can't answer for all of them. But what we're seeing now is that, at least on our side, we are trying to ensure that we're going in the right direction, and this is supported by our CEO, that we are, and everybody within top management, that we are saying we are no longer going to be investing in new projects in X. However, there will be banks that will still take advantage because there is still a financial gain. And then this leads me then to something that we've touched upon throughout this conference, which is really the idea of natural capital, and how do we go about valuing that so that it falls into the P&L and EBIT and EBITDA, so that when investors are looking at it, then that's something that they're considering. And you see this shift happening now within some of our institutional clients. So, for example, you've seen within the Norges Fund, they're rolling out of coal. In IFC, they're also looking at how to divest from certain things within their portfolio. But the thing is, you just can't unplug it right away, so it has to be a transition throughout.
Now, I saw yesterday that $6 trillion has been divested from the fossil fuel industry in the last 10 years. That's quite extraordinary. But Vincent, come in, because you've got some good points.
No, just as the role of research was questioned in the whole, I think, yes, there is a need to rethink or evolve in terms of how we perceive and how we operate our roles. Of course, we will still continue to understand, to describe the systems, etc. But now our main focus is perhaps on what are the constraints to development, what are the constraints to unlocking the potential of agroforestry expansions. And this is where our role as researchers for development, we believe, is to be also in an advisory role to different stakeholders, and also advising also on the collective modes of organization, the intermediaries between the banks, big finance, and the smallholders, which are in fact our main focus. So here there is a role of us to be part of the action fair or the investment sphere in trying to help the different partners devising the best projects that are suited to the local context, so that indeed then they can fly off by themselves once an initial support has been given to them.
No, good point. I'm going to bring in Dennis here. Have you got anything reaction to those questions about financing and?
Well, yes, I do.
Funny that,
John. The most amazing encounter that I have had this week has been with a young lady by the name of Ethel Higuenot, who is working with an organization called Mighty Earth. And this woman and her organization have managed to get a formal commitment from every cocoa buyer in the world to buy only from non-deforestation sources. But that is just the start. She has lined up half of the cocoa industry buyers in the world, half of the purchase total, to only buying in the future from agroforestry systems.
Wow.
Cocoa agroforestry systems.
Is she here? Is she here? Stand up.
Etel, are you there? But
Are you there? Are you in the room? What's your name?
Etel, Higanot.
We can hear your ears burning. It's
Unbelievable. But again, this is just the start. She's working with the rubber producers. Imagine, we've been working on rubber agroforestry systems for 20, 30 years with CIRAD and INRA, etc. And now she's lining up the rubber industry to, in the future, buy all rubber from agroforestry rubber producing systems. It's a revolution. She's working in coffee. They're going to move on to oil palm, where we have Brazilian models of oil palm agroforestry that are more productive than monoculture. I think that this audience ought to perk up its ears, and particularly the young people here, because this is a revolution, John. And we had better be ready with the agroforestry systems for cocoa and coffee and rubber and oil palm, etc., because these things are coming down the road, and we have an enormous opportunity.
Fantastic. Leave it there. Now, let's step back a bit and go back to Normandy in northern France. Are you ready, Gilles? Are you ready for this revolution which we hear is coming? I mean, are the bankers ready to give you the money? Are you ready to change France? Tell us what's going on from the point of view of a smallish farmer. How large is your farm?
Bonjour, alors, vous allez m'excuser, je ne parle pas anglais. Sorry.
C'est bon.
Donc, je m'appelle Gilles Delaunay, je suis paysan en Normandie. Alors, sur la carte, elle va s'afficher. Voilà, la Normandie, c'est environ 5-6% de la surface de la France. Et j'habite dans une petite région naturelle qui s'appelle le Houlme et qui est très, très bocagère. J'ai une exploitation laitière une exploitation de 133 hectares où nous avons 70 vaches laitières et 35 truies naisseurs engraisseurs, c'est-à-dire qu'on fait naître les petits cochons jusqu'à la vente et on fabrique l'alimentation qui est produite en partie sur la ferme. On est un peu plus de 4 à travailler sur cette exploitation, donc ramené à la personne, on peut considérer que c'est une toute petite ferme. Voilà. Et particularité quand même, ça fait 20 ans qu'on est en agriculture biologique. Et puis, je ne suis pas un agriculteur, je suis un paysan. Parce qu'un paysan, il travaille pour son territoire, il consomme local, il fait vivre son territoire, il fait vivre les commerces locaux et il participe à la protection de son territoire. Donc, je fais une grosse différence entre un agriculteur ou plutôt un agri-manager et un paysan.
Very good. I'll ask a question though. Are you a rich peasant or are you a poor peasant? Can your hedges give you money?
Je suis un paysan très heureux.
Ah. No, but very seriously, because in the end, as we are living in a capitalist system, but so are you in need of Gwendolyn next door to you? Do you need the banks more than you need the happiness? I mean, is there can your hedges give you money?
J'entends plus trop la traduction, excusez-moi. Est-ce que je touche de l'argent du bocage? Aujourd'hui, la politique agricole européenne, c'est elle qui me profite, finance des hectares de culture avec quelques services quelques pièces d'environnement, c'est-à-dire quelques arbres, quelques bosquets, quelques haies. Mais l'agriculture européenne finance d'abord les hectares de culture, de blé, de maïs et autres. Et chez moi, j'ai 20 km de haies, ça correspond à 20 hectares de bois en biodiversité qui ne sont pas financés. Donc voilà. Alors, par rapport aux banques, aujourd'hui, implanter un système agroforestier ne coûte pas très cher. D'avoir des financements à outrance, moi je dis non. Ce que je dis, c'est qu'il faut une meilleure répartition des aides entre les agriculteurs qui touchent pour leurs hectares, leurs multiples hectares de céréales, et entre ceux qui pratiquent des agricultures à base d'agroforesterie. Voilà, par rapport à la discussion que vous aviez tout de suite, là, l'agroforesterie a besoin d'un peu de financement, c'est sûr, mais elle a surtout besoin d'une valorisation par rapport aux autres types d'agriculture. Je sais pas, dans les diapos qui défilent, on peut faire défiler les suivantes pour faire voir un peu mon type d'exploitation. Chez moi, j'ai en gros plusieurs sortes d'agroforesterie. J'ai des haies en bord de rivière, j'ai des bosquets, j'ai des haies sur talus, sans talus, en travers de pentes, etc. Et je fais de la plantation. Et puis, avec l'agroforesterie, j'ai quand même fait un peu d'intra-parcellaire parce que fallait bien faire voir ça, ce que c'était aux voisins. Et quand on continue, diapo suivante s'il vous plaît, chez nous on a intégré un plan de gestion de haies, pardon, merci, on a intégré un plan de gestion de haies qui fait que aujourd'hui je sais ce que je produis comme bois sur mon exploitation sans détruire la ressource. Et ça c'est vachement important, c'est-à-dire que je prélève annuellement que ce que la nature me produit. Je ne détruis pas mon capital et vous viendrez chez moi quand vous voudrez, mais dans 25 ans, il y aura toujours la même quantité de bois, voire même plus. Et l'agroforesterie, c'est ça aussi, c'est la gestion durable. Durable, qui dit durable, dit dans le temps. Voilà ce que je voulais dire quand même sur l'agroforesterie, sur le...
Do you think that you employ more people because of the way you farm, or fewer people? Are you increasing the number of people on the land, or are you actually decreasing them?
Quand je vous disais qu'on avait 133 hectares et un peu plus de 4 personnes à travailler, c'est la même exploitation voisine fonctionne avec 1,5 personnes. Le fait de promouvoir des circuits courts, par exemple, on fait un peu de vente au détail de notre viande de porc. On vend notre lait à une fromagerie locale qui transforme en camembert, le camembert de Normandie. S'il y en a qui ne connaissent pas encore, je vous invite à le goûter. Mais ça, c'est des petites choses qui font que la plus-value, on la garde chez nous et on ne l'envoie pas vers l'industrie agroalimentaire comme on a l'habitude de le dire. Et pour revenir à l'agroforesterie qui est le sujet, c'est aussi aujourd'hui... On a 3 productions sur la ferme. On a le lait, on a la viande de porc et on a les arbres. Parce que entretenir des massifs bocagers pour qu'ils produisent du bois, c'est une véritable production. Et d'arriver à faire ça comprendre, d'arriver à faire comprendre ça aux agriculteurs aujourd'hui, c'est vachement important. C'est que non seulement la haie rend des services environnementaux, mais en plus, elle peut être source de revenus.
It comes a lot down to the consumer. Gwen, can I ask you, do you see a trend now where consumers in Canada, in France, in Europe, and in India, and wherever, are actually demanding a more sustainable foodstuffs? Or are they actively now looking for organic or different sorts of foods? And has it changed very much?
Okay, just Gwen needs a mic there, actually. I think your mic, John, in front of you, the table.
Oh, there's one
Oh,
here.
you have one there. Great. Okay.
So we see this trend where millennials are actually more willing to pay and even pay a premium for certain organic materials or products. There is as well a trend in the buying of our various corporates that say they have to become more sustainable within the supply chain process. And I just wanted to comment on what Dennis mentioned earlier in terms of the revolution is coming. I think it's already there. I think we're at the start of it. And it's really, and this mass interconnectiveness of the different systems and the fact that we're putting everybody together in this process is how the change will happen. Because if you look at kind of how financial products are done and when that's sold and made appetizing to the institutional market, it's really the lowering of the risk and the diversification process of it. So the more people you have around the table, the less risky and the more diverse it'll be.
Vincent, I mean, India, sort of huge new middle classes, surging through, India changing very, very rapidly. Is the Indian consumer demanding or wanting these new products, these new, more sustainable products?
Yeah, in India, basically now with the emerging middle class, the dietary pattern, food habits, everything is changing, and more so nowadays across the country, there is a huge demand for your organic food, and organic food is being sold at a premium price.
Yeah.
So,
but who is benefiting? Is it the big farmer or is it the small farmer?
No, it depends, because there are now, under Government of India policy, farmer producer organization of small farm holders have been constituted across the country, and they are into input management, output management, everything. So when they are selling it directly to some bigger concern at a consumption place, they are also reaping the harvest.
No, interesting. Yeah. Do you want to?
I'm just wondering whether, Dennis, you're typing away there. Did you want to make a quick comment before we take some more questions from the audience on what has been said, or
just to close off on the fact that I think there's a huge connection between what I mentioned in terms of the revolution of buying products from tree crop agroforestry systems, which is an enormous revolution, and then the financing, because the financing has got to align with that and support that and come into the picture with buttressing these commitments. And if the finance industry were to do that, the revolution could come much, much faster, obviously.
A comment on leveraging the trend toward more sustainable consumption. I think it is currently an opportunity, but there is also a potential that we go yet more into the wrong way. Take rubber, for example. 4 million hectares of rubber plantation will be needed in the next 5 years, just because of the expansion of the tire industry. Of course, this will lead to an increase of plantation. Now we have the choice, indeed, to go back, perhaps, to some of these systems that, yes, ICRAF and CIRAD have studied, the rubber agroforestry system, because in this system we can have diversification within the farm instead of having the farmers trying to find off-farm laborers for their livelihoods and price shocks. But how do we make that happen? How can the tire industry, in that example, be responsible enough to be convinced that what they do needs to trickle down to the systems upstream? And that is a key question. I'm not sure it's going to happen spontaneously. There's going to be a need for a push in that direction.
Okay, so some very interesting points. Dennis,
just get Edith Higonol on the issue, and you'll find some amazing things happening.
Okay, I don't know whether she's still in the room, whether she might like to join us on stage if you are here. Okay, so maybe another round of questions, comments. Yes, gentleman over there. So, host, if you can see this gentleman here. I don't think we've had very good, because I was saying I don't think we have had a question from this row. So first this gentleman and then this gentleman here. We'll take your two questions together. You just have a host coming over to you with the microphone. He's first, and then we'll take your question.
Yeah, I'm Sunil from India. I belong to private sector. So I think one point that we have missed in the discussion which John had with Mr. Sinha. Between industry and farmers, every year in India in agroforestry plantations, something like 800 to 900 million US dollars are invested in plantations. And what has happened after this agroforestry policy 5 years back, and when the government removed all the regulatory systems, that almost that investment has doubled. So what was being invested, about $1 billion US dollars, in the agroforestry plantations, it has gone something like 2 to 2.1 billion US dollars in last 5 years. So that has been a kind of a major achievement because, see, today, the wood-based industry in India, it imports about 50 billion US dollars worth of wood. So what gradually has started happening that when there are more and more agroforestry plantations in India, that import is likely to reduce and that money is going to get invested into agroforestry plantations. So the impact of this policy change, it should not be measured like how much government of India has invested money, but actually it is how much money the private sector and the farmers have invested in agroforestry plantations on their own. I think the impact of this policy has to be seen from that perspective. See, because the government of India or the government expenditure is gradually going to be minimal, because what we look forward to the government intervention is the policy and the regulatory system changes. We don't look for, from private sector, we don't look forward to the government for investment in agroforestry plantations. And this policy has really impacted a lot in last 5 years in terms of more investment in agroforestry systems and agroforestry plantations from private sector. Thank you.
Okay, really good point. Thank you so much for that. And we'll go to the gentleman here. Yes.
Merci. Moi, c'est Prince Tefé. Yaokafu, je suis le directeur de l'ONG Avenir de l'Environnement. Je suis un fils de producteur de café de cacao au Togo. Le Togo se trouve West Africa, au milieu du Ghana et du Bénin. Donc, ma question est la suivante. En tant que porte-parole des producteurs de ma région, au fait, est-ce que les banques occidentales travaillent en synergie avec les banques africaines qui épousent la philosophie de soutenir les producteurs agroforestiers? Par exemple, dans ma région, je suis à la tête de 1800 producteurs et que nos combats chaque jour, c'est de les amener à faire l'agroforesterie, à pratiquer de l'agroforesterie. Les producteurs acceptent de faire l'agroforesterie. Mais première année, si nous installons ces arbres dans les champs, durant les 5 ans, le rendement est faible. C'est à partir de 5 ans qu'on voit l'effet de l'agroforesterie dans les plantations caféières et cacaoyères dans ma région. Maintenant, le problème est que nous cherchons les prêts. On fait des prêts pour pouvoir faire les collectes de ces cacaos, de ces cafés, pour pouvoir vendre peut-être aux exportateurs. Mais les banques chez nous n'acceptent pas vraiment des prêts agroforestiers. Ça veut dire que des prêts, les prêts, ce sont des prêts conventionnels à taux de 18%. Vous voyez, de 18%. Donc ça veut dire que chez nous en Afrique, est-ce qu'il y a un travail entre les banques pour pouvoir nous soutenir première année, deuxième année, parce que nos récoltes, si on adopte le système de l'agroforesterie dans les plantations caféières, cacaoyères, le rendement première année, deuxième année chute parce qu'on n'utilise plus l'engrais chimique. Donc le rendement chute. Donc si le rendement chute, et il faut faire un prêt auprès des institutions de microfinance, auprès des banques pour pouvoir faire les collectes, c'est vraiment difficile. Des fois, on n'arrivait même pas à payer cette dette et que ces producteurs reviennent encore à l'agriculture conventionnelle. Est-ce qu'il y a un travail de base entre les banques pour pouvoir promouvoir cette philosophie? Est-ce qu'ici, il y a des partenaires, des donateurs, des banques qui sont prêts à nous accompagner dans cette philosophie? Je vous en prie, merci.
Okay, really good point. Thank you very much for that. 2 excellent points. John, who do you think should take those?
It's certainly not me. Gwen, I think it's one for you.
So in terms of banks and local banks and the high rate of interest, this is definitely a problem that we've seen, especially within kind of that death valley that you're talking about in the 1 to 2 year switch that's happening. And on our side for BNP Paribas, we have local banks, local retail banks in certain parts in Africa. And so we are working with them on how to de-risk this process and how do we look at changing interest rates that take into account the crop yields and the decrease in crop yields from the 1 to 2 year portion of it. So there is work being done. Within UN Environment, for example, one of the projects that we're working on is in Côte d'Ivoire. on cocoa. And for here, it's also working with ECRAF on looking at how the payment structure can be changed in the beginning. So it's not based on fees or money, but it's based on the cocoa plants themselves. So you would pay, if you are part of their program, you would pay, I don't know, 2 or 3 cocoa plants or whatever it is in order to get the graph of the plant in order to improve the process. And then as part of the UN Environment Deal as well, we're talking to other banks out there to see if they can come into the fold so that we can expand it, because on our side we're not in every country, so we won't be able to do it on countries that we don't physically have a retail presence. So there is work and studies being done there to switch finance and financial instruments into purpose. And just to go back on change in consumption, I think that also applies into what we do with our money, because some of us here have has a pension, and each year, you know, you have to click a box to say, this is where I'm putting my money. How many of you have actually looked in there to see if the fund that you're investing in is in line with the impact that you're hoping to get? So I bet, can I get a show of hands? I'm actually curious.
Okay, show of hands.
Yeah.
Not that many, really.
They're shy.
Have you got a full response from the House? Okay.
Because that's also a trigger for change somehow, because if there's enough of us that go and ask the person who's sitting behind the guichet of the bank to say, hey, how come you're not proposing this product to me? Where can I find more of this type of thing? That's also an indication of demand.
Okay, and what about the original point made by the gentleman over there? Did anybody want to comment on that? I thought that was very interesting. The private sector policies. Who wants to take that particular point on? Yes, Rahish.
Absolutely. I told that the regulatory regime in setting up of wood-based industries has been relaxed, and with that relaxation, more than 3,400 licenses have been issued across the country, and that too in only 10 states. He comes from paper industry. The wood and pulp industry have been taken out from the list of your wood-based industries. So pulp and wood-based industry are now free from licensing from forest, at least from forest department's area. And the facts and figures which he gave about the import, that is also perfectly in order, because more and more trees, if they come in the agricultural landscape, the farmer's income will not only increase, but the imports will also go down substantially.
Okay, let's move it on another little way. One of the other big sustainable goals, the number 12, I think, which is the climate emissions, which are terribly important. Now, we've obviously heard how tree planting has got a fantastic part to play in the great battle against climate change. But is there a danger, and I'm going to ask Tony here, is there sorry, not Tony, Dennis, is there a danger that we plant trees or we just go mad on this thing? And I mean, one of the questions you had was, can agriculture actually achieve the emissions neutrality? And I don't know if it's there or not.
Well, you sound like you're doubtful.
Yeah, I am.
And I suppose many in the agriculture field, the vast majority, are very doubtful that agriculture could ever achieve emissions neutrality, because one, it's a extremely important industry. It's expanding all the time, and more and more emissions are created in the process of fuel and soils management, etc. But we've done the calculations, John. And currently, tree cover is increasing on farmlands so rapidly that about 750 million tons of CO2 emissions are being stored additionally every single year from the increase in tree cover. And that's tree cover of farmers who are putting trees out in their farms not because they're being paid for it, not because they've got loans for it, wish they did, but because it makes money for them. And the countries with the biggest tree increases on farmland are ones you wouldn't believe. India, 7%. China, 7%, Indonesia, 7%, and Brazil, of all countries, has the highest increase in annual tree cover on farmlands of any country in the world, 14%. Now, that's trees on farmlands because they make money for farmers. Now, what we got to do is stretch the goal. If we're already absorbing 750 million tons of CO2 every year due to increased tree cover on farmlands, what if we tripled the rate at which tree cover on farmlands was done? Again, not by paying farmers to grow trees they don't want, but by increasing their ability to make money from the trees, the value chains, the credit, and all the things we've been talking about. We could easily triple it. And you know what would happen if we did? Agroforestry would at that point be absorbing 2.1 gigatons of CO2 per year of carbon emissions, and it would offset the entire emissions from the livestock sector, soil carbon emissions from agriculture, and all of the methane emissions from rice production. We can do it, John.
Yeah, but you can do it, but can you, Gilles? Can you triple the number of trees on your 100 and whatever hectares and do as Dennis says? Are you an example for us all?
Alors, à côté de chez moi, j'ai des exemples. Là, vous avez une chaufferie, donc une chaudière à la ville de Rennes, capitale régionale. 24 semi-remorques de 90 mètres cubes par jour. C'est du bois qui arrive à faire jusqu'à 300 km. Chaque camion fait 300 km pour approvisionner une chaufferie bois qui, soi-disant, économise du carbone pour la planète. Et là, moi, on est arrivé dans les incohérences complètes. À côté de chez nous, on a créé une coopérative. Et on fait des livraisons où le bois, chaque tonne de bois fait moins de 5 km. Ça, c'est un bilan carbone positif. Ça, c'est un bilan carbone qui aussi oblige les agriculteurs à avoir des gérés durablement. Parce que les approvisionnements de la grosse chaufferie que je vais vous montrer tout de suite, c'est du bois issu d'arrachage de haies. Donc on peut subventionner l'agroforesterie, si 10 ans plus tard on arrache tout, ça ne sert à rien. Il faut avoir des gestions durables et des engagements dans la durée. Voilà. Les réductions de taxes carbone, moi je veux bien, c'est fou, c'est phénoménal. Dans ma région, il y a 7 ou 8 chaudières bois énergie qui se sont implantées. Il y a moins de 10 ans, moins de 5 ans. Allez, aujourd'hui, il n'y en a plus que 2 qui tournent à temps complet au bois, parce qu'aujourd'hui, le gaz de ville est moins cher. Donc, on a subventionné des chaufferies bois pour réduire le carbone, et aujourd'hui, ces chaufferies-là, parce qu'elles n'ont pas d'engagement, elles fonctionnent au gaz.
Okay.
It's well said. Okay, let's get back to the floor. This is terrible. We were limited. We're constricted. We only have a minute more before we have to close this whole thing down.
Okay, because we do have the video tribute as well. Does anybody have a very quick comment to make? Because we are going to be moving into another session as well, so we will be able to take some more of it. Okay, so very quickly, microphone down here, please. This side of, yes, where you are, white t-shirt, the gentleman here. No, this is the hand I've seen, sorry. I'm going to go with the gentleman at the end. Hint, hint, for those of you who want to ask questions, it's easier for me to see you down here for the next session. Very quick comment, please. Thank you.
My name is Devendra Pandey. I'm from India. I've been hearing about the carbon sequestration potential of the agroforestry systems. But I believe the research work done in this area is very, very limited and very sketchy. Just now, Dennis has also given some statistics about what is the carbon sequestration potential of the agroforestry system. But I believe there is a lack of studies, especially on the carbon potentials in the agroforestry system. We do not know how much actually the carbon is sequestered by the soil, how much is, because the trees which are growing in the agroforestry system have different allometric functions compared to the trees which are growing in the forest area. In fact, my experience with India and also seeing the literature of many other countries shows that the allometric equations of the forest species are being applied in the agroforestry tree species. Secondly, we do not have the knowledge about what is the extent of litter, what is the extent of, in fact, deadwood, because these are all being plowed back and it is not being estimated. So I think there's a need for seeing the role of the agroforestry in the climate change mitigation. It is important to undertake more studies so that we have very accurate and the authentic information.
Okay, brilliant. And I think, Vincent, that actually touches on what you had said earlier as well about the need for far more data. On that point, we're going to leave this discussion, but please stay in the room because I want to hand over to Dennis, because Dennis, I believe, and before that, perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for John, first of all, for chairing a super session, John. Right. Thank you so much. Wonderful. And to our panelists. Thank you very much. So I'm going to hand over to Dennis because he's going to introduce the video tribute to Tony Rinaldo. Dennis, do you see that? From Julian, by the way. Fantastic.
Okay.
Tony Rinaldo, the laureate of the Right Livelihood Award.
Yes, indeed, Karen. Well, you've blindsided me, of course, because it was scheduled for the next session.
Yes, we had to change things around.
But things move quickly around here. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a tremendous pleasure to just introduce a brief message from my friend, colleague, and brother, Tony Rinaldo, who has spent a lifetime in the development of and the extension and scaling up of a technique that we call farmer-managed natural regeneration, or régénération assistée in French. Tony spent 17 years in Niger and was part of the original process of experimentation and promotion that enabled that farmer-managed natural regeneration practice, a traditional practice, to actually begin to revive on the landscape and to gain momentum that resulted in forest policy reform and an explosion of farmer-managed natural regeneration across that country. The U.S. Geological Survey has just last year mapped or remapped the extent of the hundreds of millions of trees on farmlands in Niger alone, and it's in the 200 to 300 million trees restored by farmers. And so enough from my side. Tony has a very challenging message for the research and development community based on his experience, and I'll turn it over to you, Karen, to run the video right now. Thank you.
Okay, team, so here we go.
Greetings from World Vision Australia in Melbourne, and I wish to thank the conference organisers for inviting me to present, even though circumstances prevented me from attending in person, unfortunately. But I wish you every success with the conference, especially at this time when the world needs trees on farmland and landscapes in general more than ever before. Farmer-managed natural regeneration, or FMNR, has come a long way since 2012, when ICRAF, World Vision Australia, and the Evergreening Agriculture Alliance co-hosted the first Beating Famine Conference in Nairobi. During that conference, there are many questions about what is FMNR? How is it distinguished from agroforestry and alley cropping and other related topics? So there was a lot of unknowns and uncertainty about it. There's been a great increase in research attention given to FMNR. And a prime example of that is the EC-funded and ICRAF-managed Greening Africa project across 8 Sahelian countries. And I think $6 million are committed to research within that project. And FMNR is being implemented by a growing number of NGOs around the world. World Vision alone has introduced FMNR to about 24 countries, and there's much, much greater donor awareness globally on the significance of FMNR. Today, the Niger story is well known. There are in excess of 6 million hectares of land that was previously all but denuded, with an average tree density of 4 trees per hectare, that are now covered with anything from 20, 30, even more than 40 trees per hectare. And this has happened very rapidly. Calculating back using the satellite images, it seems to have spread at a rate of 250,000 hectares per year for 20 years, with no government intervention at the time and minimal NGO support. And it's something that has continued to this day. So nearly 40 years on, farmers are still practicing FMNR and adapting it to the ever-changing conditions that they face. FMNR continues to spread beyond Niger, as there are many NGOs and other actors actively promoting it around the world. This particular slide is from northern Ghana, and over a 4-year period there's a very rapid transition in the vegetation in this country. So it's not the same season, it's not a deliberate attempt to deceive you, but focus on the vegetation and how that changes over a 4-year period. Very, very rapid and low-cost transition there. And the impact has been very high. In Niger, for example, the impact of having nearly 6 million hectares of trees back on landscapes, farmers are growing an additional 500,000 tonnes of grain per year without irrigation or fertilizers or improved seed, simply by virtue of the fact that the trees have improved the microclimate and the soil fertility. In one of the poorest countries in the world, farmers, their gross income has increased by around $1,000 per year per household, and cumulatively across the country, this equates to around $900 million. And the original investment of projects and interventions to promote FMNR was minimal in comparison to the benefits which continue to this day. Even so, FMNR has an image problem. The very things that have driven it and made it a success and have enabled farmers to embrace it, in some circles they're perceived as weaknesses. For example, it's low cost, which of course makes it accessible to even the very poorest farmers. And they're not dependent on overseas funding or expertise to initiate FMNR. But its low cost at the same time may be perceived as being cheap and a second choice intervention from the suite of interventions that you might use for land restoration. FMNR is farmer managed. And of course, this is a plus because farmers who manage their own land and natural resources are highly motivated to mould those resources to meet their own objectives. And every year the conditions are changing. The economic, social and environmental conditions are changing, and farmers need to have that freedom to choose how they mould FMNR to meet their needs in any particular year. And yet again, in some circles, being farmer managed may be read as being unscientific or backward. And in some government circles, it may be perceived as being dangerous because some governments like to control their natural resources. Thirdly, FMNR primarily restores indigenous species. And there's great advantage to this, particularly if you're regrowing trees from living stumps, because the regrowth is very, very rapid. And the plants are in situ, they're already adapted to the environment, and many indigenous trees are multifunctional. They may be fertilizer trees, fodder, certainly windbreaks, the supply of fuel wood and building poles, fruits, and so on. And yet, indigenous is often perceived as backward and inferior. And I see a significant bias against indigenous species in many countries that I visit, and a favouring of so-called elite and often exotic species. Dr. Richard Sturzaker, a CSIRO scientist, once warned me that if I relied primarily on anecdotal and qualitative evidence, the credibility of FMNR would always be in question and its level of acceptance would always be low. And he was largely correct in that judgment. And so therefore I call on you as a scientific body to take a closer look at FMNR. You have the capability to analyse and to measure what drives millions of poor, supposedly risk-averse and small landholder farmers to adopt FMNR in droves. And you can relate your findings to the pressing contemporary issues of our day, such as climate change, conflict, migration, land degradation, poverty, loss of biodiversity, and food insecurity. Farmers are saying that their livestock perform better in the presence of trees, and we certainly have instances in Kenya of milk production increasing 200 to 500% with the same animals. And in Uganda, instances where livestock stocking rates have increased 450% without causing overgrazing and degradation. But we don't know how much has fodder quality and quantity increased by. We don't know the impact of trees on animal health, on growth rates, reproduction, and profitability. Farmers are saying that their crop yields have doubled in the presence of these indigenous regenerated trees. But we don't know under which conditions, which species are preferable, at what density and what pruning regime, and what are the co-benefits, which equally must be put into the equation if we're going to calculate the full benefits of FMNR. There's no longer room for only calculating a single benefit, such as crop yield or livestock production. The co-benefits must be included in the equation. Farmers are saying that when they restore the vegetation, groundwater recharge is much greater, and springs and streams which had dried up for decades are coming back to life. But we don't know how much area needs to be restored in order to have that impact. And what's the best way to select sites for recharge? Farmers are saying that crops growing near their trees are drought tolerant. But which tree species? At what density? What pruning regime? And why? What are the mechanisms that cause this counterintuitive idea that having more trees results in more grain? What are the mechanisms making that even possible? Trees are helping to put more organic carbon back into the soils, but we don't know how much and how fast. And in this age of climate change, can FMNR actually mitigate against climate change? And how quickly, how sustainably, and at what cost? These are very, very important questions, and I'm sure that you as scientists have even better questions than I do. After all, that's what you're good at. Through your work, you can help to dispel myths and misconceptions about FMNR. Government ministers need the information that you provide in order to create the correct enabling policies that will help spread and implement FMNR. Donors need the information that you provide so they can justify their investments and use their money in the wisest way. And project implementers need your information in order to base their activities on evidence and in order to be able to measure the impact of their work. Dr. Sturzaker also said to me, Tony, FMNR has the farmer's vote. And I love that quote. But what FMNR needs today is your evidence-based vote. In order for FMNR to take off to the next level, FMNR needs you to quantify, to explain, and to provide the evidence for what farmers are seeing and acting on already in their land. Thank you.
Note.
Just if we could, Dennis's mic, please. Yes,
just a
now.
footnote to Tony's challenge to the research community. Tony was in Stockholm last November to receive the Alternative Livelihoods Award, otherwise known as the Alternative Nobel Prize, and received the Order of Australia this past January for a lifetime of focus on the scaling up of FMNR. Currently, we know that there's about 21 million hectares of this practice in the Sahelian countries alone. And there's enormous possibility throughout the world for its future expansion. So, Karen, I hope we could put our hands together for Tony Ronaldo and
Absolutely.
the FMNR of the world.
Absolutely. Well done. Okay, thank you so much.